Welcome to everybody back to the Leading4Value podcast. My name is Ken Rethmeier, and I'm your host today again. And this is episode number 18. And sharing the screen with me is Mr. John Bost, and I will introduce him a little bit later because he's going to take on a key role in this exercise that we're going to go through. And today's focus, I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. Today's focus is going to be about the second page of the part of the model that is part of chapter 2. And this is all about relationships. And when I talk about relationships, every leader, as you can see, has some kind of role that he or she plays in creating and building relationships of value and impact. In the terminology of this particular episode, it's called networks. And I do have an exercise that I will go through very quickly with you that helps your team to identify what does your network look like in terms of key players, what are the connecting points, how do they operate, and then more importantly, how do you as a leader nurture that environment so that the teams are participating in a more effective way than they are currently. And that's the purpose behind a network analysis and moving forward from a personal and organizational perspective. And as you can see on this slide, I have invited John Bost, the former mayor of the Village of Clemmons in North Carolina. Just so you know, Clemmons and Bermuda Run, where I was mayor for 2 terms, are side by side. Split between us is the Yadkin River. And I can tell you, John was a great help to me during my experience as mayor. And so what I asked him to do is to think about some of the roles that he's had in that regard and the networks that guided his thinking and impact effectively in that participation as mayor and other roles. So let's go back to the diagram. This is the model: explore, expand, excel in terms of ideas, relationships, processes, and systems. And the whole idea behind this model, as you may remember, is to help people walk through the process from ideation of a vision and what you want to achieve, how you engage in a proper way to get it going, how do you design that implementation, and then what are the synergies that you can create along the way. And if you think about it, networking is a very critical component of that because you don't want to miss the opportunity to have the right people engaged in a proper way. And those stakeholders take on a greater degree of interdependency with you and your team as a consequence. So quickly, what does network mapping look like? You have a diagram here, and this is a network analysis of a hospital and some participating activities and businesses that are connected. So the first thing you're going to try to do is get your team to explore what is the network? Who are the members of that? And then secondly, think about how can you enrich that environment. And in the example that I have, it has to do with transportation as the source. And I'll tell you that really a good story up in Philadelphia when one of the hospitals was having a high rate of low birth weight babies coming early, having a lot of problems. And typically, low birth weight babies end up with some pretty significant neurological problems. And what we found out, this was the Episcopal Hospital, we found out after they tried numerous times to increase the number of clinics for women to come, prenatal care, it wasn't working. Well, guess what? They weren't paying attention to the client and the client's needs. And most of these people were low income and as a consequence, did not have access to effective transportation. So the hospital, after failing a couple of times, went out to the local churches, rented their buses that they used typically on either Wednesday or Sunday. And as a matter of fact, what happened was it expanded their opportunity to get more patients in and reduce the number that were not receiving proper prenatal care. Guess what? That was something they hadn't thought about. So the idea of expanding one's thinking is to really take a look at it and find out how can we make it better? And then obviously the bottom line is you want everything to have superior outcomes. That is, results with meaning and meaningful results. So the question for you is to think about your own network and how you could work better in terms of guiding your hospital or your organization. And the tool doesn't matter what type of organization you are, they apply in all settings. So we're going to go through very quickly part 2, and then I'm going to go back to John and we'll talk about his experiences. And in the exercise, you will see after you've identified, and you can color code those by types of contribution that those organizations make in your hospital or your organization. You connect the dots so you see where the interdependencies are, and the ultimate goal is to see how transportation can improve the overall performance of that network. And as a consequence, it'll give you an opportunity to stimulate your thinking amongst your own team and so forth. In part 2 of the exercise, and again, there's a handout as I normally have, and the handout will go step by step. I'm just going to do a 30,000 foot overview. But here's when you've connected the dots, then you step back and say, what can we do better than we're not getting it for now? Now, let me turn to John, and I'm going to stop sharing the screen in just a minute. As I mentioned, John was the mayor of the Village of Clemmons, across the Yadkin River from Bermuda Run, when I got elected. And he and Dan Pugh and another town nearby, but mostly John, were very, very instrumental in helping me, the new guy in the block, if you will, in this political environment, although I had served in leadership positions throughout my Navy career and other opportunities. This was a whole unique experience. And John was very, very helpful in guiding me and directing me to the network that we were working within for a variety of different roles. So what I've done is I've asked him to think about his own networks in his leadership roles. What was the impact of that? How did he learn from that? And then what are the takeaways? And I think he's got 5 words that will really be beneficial that you will hear. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen and turn the microphone over to John. John, thank you again very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Ken. Honored to be a part of your podcast. Interestingly enough, I didn't know the story that you would tell, and yet very much parallels with my own life experience. Again, I began as a chemistry teacher. One of my objectives was to help students understand how to apply the kinds of things that they were learning in the classroom. And out of that came a significant community network from anywhere from, golly, Pete, I've been dropping projects that were built in science classrooms, etc., and became so involved in the community that I began to think about what I could do, value add to the community outside the classroom. And that's when I went back for a master's degree in fund development and community relations. Immediately was hired by the adjoining school system to basically work as an associate to the superintendent in community relations. I did that for 5 years and was so successful at that and engaging businesses, partnerships, volunteers, colleges, etc., in a school system that a pastor in a large church in Winston-Salem, which happens to be my hometown, was struggling with the director of Wake Forest Baptist Hospital. And I was so intrigued by that I resigned at 20 years and went to Winston-Salem and became an executive pastor and helped build a campus from 11 acres to 35 acres to eventually a sale to Wake Forest University. The interesting part in that is that I began to engage the churches, the buses, the kinds of things that you talked about, in under-resourced communities where particularly there were problems with infant mortality. I was appointed by the mayor to the Infant Mortality Coalition. We began working literally in partnership with Wake Forest Hospital, Wake Forest Baptist, now Adrian, and I think they've merged again since then. But anyway, we actually opened a birthing center in a high needs area, and also launched an early childhood initiative that you may have heard later through Governor Hunt called Smart Start. Our nonprofit was called First Start, talking about networks. One of my pastor friends of a large church that I'd been involved with knew the governor's pastor. Called the governor's pastor, said, hey, you need to visit what we're doing in partnership with Wake Forest. The governor came down and said, let's do this in 12 counties. I then was involved with Ashley Thrift of a local law office here in the Forsyth Partnership for Children. And so you can kind of see how that grew. Eventually, I decided to launch my own business, Master Counsel, and in order to consult and coach people in putting together strategic partnerships. The 5 words you mentioned, if it's okay for you for me to move on.
Absolutely.
And after talking and reading your manuscript, particularly chapter 2, thinking through some of what you've reviewed here on the podcast, 5 words did come to my mind. And of course, the first one is relationships. Relationships are everything. And that's where human capital is built around a vision and an idea. And of course, second to that, relationships is the type of relationships that in some way sync up with your vision. And that has to do with alignment. So relationships, building relationships by way of a vast network that is in alignment with your vision, then begins to form, and I was trying to think through this earlier today, I know no other way if I would use a little s and as spiritual, there is a spiritual rhythm of sorts that you can begin to feel when relationships mature and alignment with your vision is occurring. And out of that rhythm develops opportunities. Ideation is flourishing. So opportunities arise. And with those opportunities, assuming that a leader begins to follow in their own personal calling and their vision, their preferred future, with those opportunities is the necessity of productivity, a word that I gleaned from the information that you were just sharing. And with that productivity, critical that there be accountability. So those are the 5 words that I would offer: relationship, alignment, rhythm, opportunities, productivity, and finally, accountability. And I thought more about that over the night. It's not just accountability, that is, that you're aligning yourself with individuals that will be truthful about your strengths and weaknesses, as you can also be truthful with them about strengths and weaknesses, but the positive benefit to a leader of honest feedback. The more successful you've been, particularly in politics, the less likely people are to be honest with you. When they spot weaknesses, they will, applaud your strengths. But one of the most valuable things to me are those relationships that form in such a way that people understand your vision, they appreciate your productivity, and are willing to hold you accountable with honest feedback. So that was a mouthful, Ken. I hope that was helpful and on point.
No, absolutely. And John, I thank you very, very much. The description you have provided and the insight regarding the role of networks and the importance to leadership is being aware, get those sensors out there constantly and think about what do we need to do to make it better and to make it more efficient. And as you said, very productive, because that's what it's all about. And the idea that as a leader, you have the opportunity, I have the opportunity, and the people watching this. So it's important, first off, to draw the picture of what is the network that we depend on. How do we interact with those organizations? To your point about those relationships, how do we build those relationships in such a way so that it's consistent with our vision? And then the direction of that then will automatically open up opportunities and so forth and so on. And I think one of the key words that John and I both believe is very important in leadership is accountability. As a leader, you have authority, which is either your title in the military, how many stripes you have on your sleeve, and that tells you how important you are in the organization. The second piece is responsibility, and that is, what is the scope of the work you do? And as a leader, it's even bigger and, quite frankly, pretty lonesome, because when you get to the top, you're pretty well isolated. And then thirdly, the one area as a consultant I saw the greatest failure rate was accountability. And to John's credit, I know firsthand how successful he was as the mayor of the town of the Village of Clemmons. And it was very good for me to have someone like John around. And I sincerely appreciate his ability to come join us. And I'm going to stop the sharing if I get my act together here. And whoops. We'll go back and I will tell you now that what we're going to do is we're going to try to identify some things that are important for you to remember when you're doing your work. And I have a slide, I hope I can get here pretty quickly, that outlines how big that network is in healthcare. Because right now, it's amazing how much there is that's going on right now. And it's a very complex environment. And I encourage each of you who are watching this to be part of that. Join us again in episode number 19. It'll have a different topic. And again, John, thank you so very much for your time. I sincerely appreciate it. And I will close out the meeting at this point.
Thank you.